My name is Christy. I'm 19. 3 years ago, I met my biological father. But I wish I had never met him at all, because he's the worst man on the planet. I lived together with my mom and my grandparents. I've never been a normal girl. My birth was kind of a tragedy for my family. You see, my mom was only 15 years old when she got pregnant by her classmate, but he refused to admit that he was the father. Mom decided to keep the baby. To avoid any drama, my grandparents moved from Atlanta to San Diego for a fresh start. Of course, it wasn't easy for Mom, but it could have been worse, right? When I was 15 years old, I used to work in a clothing store after classes. One day, after work, my best friend Diana took me to her favorite milkshake place. Suddenly, I noticed a strange guy by the window staring at us. I thought he was just checking Diana out, as usual. She's very beautiful, and it happened all the time, so I didn't attach much importance to it. However, the next day, when we went to another cafe in another part of the neighborhood, I noticed that guy again. He took a seat next to us and pretended to act naturally. I complained to Diana, but she said that he was pretty hot, not to mention his sports car. During the next week, I noticed that creepy guy stalking me by the window of the clothing store I worked at. And at this point, it wasn't funny at all. Later that night, I was riding home on my bicycle and noticed his car parked in my neighborhood, right next to my house. That freak knew where I lived! I complained to my mom, but she told me to stop watching so many horror movies. Over the course of the next week, I saw his car several times and freaked out. That guy was literally stalking me. And then one evening on my way home, I lost my patience and went to his car to talk to him. But as I got closer, I noticed my mom sitting in the car and arguing with him as if they were old friends. Very interesting. I knocked on the window and asked him directly what was going on. Mom was very confused and asked me to go home. Later that night, I was helping my granny with dinner. Suddenly, the door opened and my mother entered the house with that creep. She invited him for dinner. The awkward pause was very long, but then Granny yelled, "Oh, for God's sake, he's your father, Christy!" I was completely shocked. My brand new father said he was young and stupid, but now he had grown up and he realized that he made a horrible mistake. In addition, he was having an affair with my mom. Again. When Granny heard about that, she flew off the deep end, but I was too overwhelmed. So I just went to my room, called Diana, and told her that her favorite hot stalker was my 32-year-old father. I cannot even call him that, so let's call him Bob, because that's his name. When the truth was revealed, Bob began to make many attempts to buy my forgiveness. Surprisingly, his family was very wealthy. Although I liked him, I still wanted to make him suffer for a little while. Sometimes I invited Bob to shopping malls with me and Diana and forced him to buy everything that we asked for. If he behaved well, I allowed him to join our milkshake meetings from time to time. It was very unusual for me to receive so much attention. One day, we went to my mother's hometown of Atlanta to meet with my great-grandma. She had no idea I even existed until recently. Granny Sarah was turning 75, so we prepared a small barbecue party for her birthday. I felt a little weird in that big, luxurious house. All of the guests were staring at me, but I didn't know how to behave. During the evening, Bob made a toast and proposed to my mom. It was all very touching. Granny Sarah hugged me and whispered in my ear that her grandson should have proposed to my mom 15 years ago. Obviously, my mom said yes. They returned to San Diego and got married. My mother's parents didn't attend the wedding because they didn't approve of her choices. Granny felt very offended. As for me, I was glad to see her happy face, and I supported her. Unfortunately, soon after the wedding, Granny Sarah passed away. I didn't get the chance to know her better, which was sad because I liked her a lot. Bob was her only grandson, and he inherited the house and a solid amount of money. He purchased a new house in San Diego, and we moved from my grandparents' house to live together as a family. Meanwhile, I began to feel some strange vibe from Bob. After having received the inheritance, he suddenly began to allow himself to make rude comments towards my mom. He called her stupid and uneducated because she never got her college degree. Of course, Bobby. She had to raise me. He stopped spending money on me and also took me for granted. One day at school, I complained about Bob to Diana, but she immediately told me that I was being too selfish. Then she yelled, "The world doesn't revolve around you, Christy," and left. She has also been acting very weird recently, but I thought that she was probably stressing out because of her college exams. On my parents' second wedding anniversary, we went to a theme park to swim with the dolphins because my mom adored them. While she was swimming, I noticed that Bob was flirting with some random girls in bikinis. To top it all off, he took the number of one girl. Then he found an excuse to get away for a while. I followed him secretly. And guess what? Bob was kissing that girl in the gateway. I didn't tell my mom because I didn't want to spoil the celebration. That jerk came back with a happy face and took us to a restaurant as if nothing had ever happened. I had to expose him, and I knew who the right person was to turn to. The next day, I paid a visit to Granny. She wasn't surprised to hear that story, but she didn't want to interfere because she already had a huge fight with Mom before the wedding. Mom forbade her to say any bad things about Bob, so I had to take matters into my own hands. Mom was deeply in love and ignored all the obvious cues. This is why I developed a plan to collect more evidence that Bob was cheating on her. And I needed Diana's help in my investigation, so I invited her to meet me in her favorite milkshake cafe. When I asked her to help me, her reaction was very strange. She began to yell at me, saying that I should mind my own business and get my own life. I was shocked. I mean, who is that girl and where's my Diana? She just refused to help me. I guessed that she was having some secret struggle and asked what was going on in her life, but she didn't tell me anything. On my way home, I prepared a speech for my mom, but Bob made it even easier for me. At home, I found her in tears, packing our bags. Bob literally kicked us out of the house. He broke up with Mom and filed for divorce. I got furious. I yelled at him, calling him dirty cheater and betrayer. But he just didn't care. He told me, "I'm sorry, Christy, but this kind of life is not for me." We moved back to my grandparents, and he never asked again how I was doing. It's needless to say that my mom was completely crushed. But then the story became even more disgusting. 2 months after we moved back in with my grandparents, I went to Bob's house to pick up my camera because I forgot it in the attic. I didn't warn him about my visit, and he had no chance to hide the ugly truth from me. Bobby had a new girlfriend. You probably already guessed. But I was stupid and ignored all the obvious signs. Just like my mom, Diana. Bobby was living with my 18-year-old best friend in my house as a couple. I met her in the kitchen baking pancakes in a nightgown. She froze and stared at me, and I stared at her. It was the most painful moment of my life. I didn't yell at her. I just said, "You're officially dead to me, Diana." And I ran out of that house. I didn't know how to tell my mom. I mean, Diana used to be like a second daughter to her. But I told her. Mom cried all night long. But in the morning, she told me that maybe it was time for her to focus on her career and go back to college. The next day, I helped her to apply to the local college. And eventually, she was accepted. Meanwhile, I also managed to get into a college in another city. I was glad to move to campus and get far away from Bob and his new girlfriend. During the next year, I was very busy with my studies and my new friends. But when I returned to my grandparents for summer vacation, I faced some new challenges. Diana called and texted me all the time, begging me to meet her. But I ignored her. One day, she followed me at a farmer's market and forced me to talk to her. She was very pregnant and very sad. So I gave up and we went to our favorite old milkshake place. She had gotten pregnant 6 months ago, but Bobby began to act like a disrespectful jerk. He drank a lot and cheated on her all the time. He even invited girls to their house when Diana was at home. Her life was a mess. And now Bob wanted to leave her alone with the baby. Diana was desperate. She cried and she asked me to forgive her. Part of me was very satisfied because I had hated her for so long, but another part of me felt compassion. I hugged her and we buried the hatchet. I went to Bob's house to help Diana pack her bags. The music was very loud and Bob was having a pool party with 2 young ladies. He was very surprised to see me. Bob was drunk. He was singing, "I sold the house! I sold the house! I'm free!" I took Diana to her parents' house and then decided to call Bob's relatives in Atlanta to tell them that Bob had gone crazy. His father picked up the phone. He apologized for his son and he was eager to help Diana and I, if necessary. 3 months later, Diana gave birth to my, sister, Roxy. She's raising her daughter with the help of her parents, checks from Bob's father and my mom. Yes, my mom forgave her too. She found a new boyfriend at college, and she's very happy now. As for Bob, I haven't heard from him since. He's probably destroying another girl's life at the moment.